But if you're trying to build teamwork around intrinsic motivation, you can't just let everybody do whatever they want. You can't empower endlessly. You set limits. You make sure you have the right people in the right position. You make sure that there's a proper and helpful set of relationships that facilitate this kind of environment. When you have that going, what you're hoping for is this welling up from deep sense of purpose and mission through challenging conversations that require vulnerability, that create this harmony that isn't artificial. It's a willingness to not only engage but resolve conflict so that we can get to commitment, so that we can have high standards.
All right, welcome back to the Hard But Worth It podcast. Here we are continuing on with our goal setting conversation. Mm-hmm. We want to thank you for joining us. And if you following us, you like these videos, please like them, share them, expand our network. We really appreciate that. Kirk, in our last episode, we're talking about goals. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things the points we were making was the differentiator between extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals, and how that's actually a newer concept and why we may not be as familiar with that, but learning to at least see them as two different things. And I think we at least started to paint that picture to give people an idea of how to maybe step into that, upgrade their goal setting for 2024, mix it up a little bit. But there's still components to any goal that I think we want to talk about too, which this is dropping into the language that we tend to use or avoid, words, trigger words. So there's these words like accountability, responsibility, who are the people around this that are going to participate in the collaboration of, is it a shared goal? Is it an individual goal? I mean, there's all these things. Yeah. And, maybe some people resist it. Goal setting, it's the thing that's the meeting we don't want to show up to because we felt like it was put on us. Maybe it was used in a negative way to punish us. But what we've learned too, what I've learned is some of the most influential people, successful people who are, I would say, living the most fulfilled life, making big impacts in the world, have found a way to become friends with goal setting and actually have worked it into a significant part of their life where they're very clear on what they're giving their time to. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea of doing more is actually the discipline of learning how to get focused and eliminate things by doing less, right? Doing less of the things we love. So we're talking about accountability and responsibility and all these things, but a goal really needs to be attached to something that we have to measure, or we're just caught up in a vision conversation. And we could say it's goal setting all day long. You and I could sit in a room, we can have teams in there, and we can have a ton of fun dreaming, blue sky dreams.
Awesome. It'll be a great day.
And it is very fun.
Yeah.
But 2 or 3 months later, we look back and nothing was achieved other than we can remember, the fun talks we had.
Yeah.
So what's involved in this process of like having the necessary dreams and visions and goals that are set from that, but then moving the needle to where we get the things done?
Yeah.
We're actually starting to see progress.
Yep. It's the idea of you got to be able to measure it. If you can't measure it, it's vision language, it's purpose language, it's mission and why, and those are super important conversations. In fact, I'd say they're foundational. But if those conversations, I would say it's natural for those when they're the right ones, when they're meaningful and they connect to that intrinsic place in us. It's a very natural thing that goals will emerge. They just emerge. You have this strong desire to build a family and get married. And out of that comes a lot of behavior and activity. And then you're trying to buy houses and you're selling this to get cash. And all this stuff happens because out of all that deep meaning that you're looking for comes, I want to buy a house. I want to have a kid. I want to get a better job. And goals emerge. It's very natural. When goals don't naturally emerge, I don't know if we have the meaning work done right yet. And we often hold that in very loose, playful, atmospheric ways. And yes, it's very fun, but it doesn't convert, right? So I think when you do that work well, it converts into goal language. But you've gotten into goal language when you can measure it. Now, a lot of people say you can't measure that. And they either are talking about something that doesn't exist, because anything that exists you can measure. So they might be talking about something that doesn't exist, and that's a nonsensical conversation to have. But sometimes what they mean is you can't measure it precisely. And that's fair. There are a lot of things you can't measure precisely, but you can still measure it. And what measuring does is it causes us to be able to say, did I do it? Yes or no? And it focuses us and it helps us pay attention to it.
Right.
That's the thing I'm going to pay. It gets our pay attentioner going, right? And that's one of the great things about being able to set goals is it what you measure will improve or will adjust and change. And so if you can't get to the measurable, concrete and specific and verifiable language, you're not really goal setting. The problem, though, is at that point, you insert the word accountability. If I can measure the thing, then I can know if I failed or not.
Right.
And I don't want to know that. I'd like to keep a little distance from that. And so I'll use vague language. And then I can claim anything I did was a success. I want to lose weight. Okay, 3 months later, I lost 3 pounds. Hey, good job. That isn't what I meant.
Yeah.
But I don't have to actually acknowledge that I didn't do the work, right? So there's this word accountability shows up. And the challenge of accountability, it goes back to our last episode where a lot of our experience with accountability has been somebody else holding us accountable to something we may or may not be deeply committed to or intrinsically committed to. I don't like that feeling. So when we flip this from external motivation to intrinsic motivation, I think sometimes, especially in our immature state, we hope that the accountability thing will go away. And I'll just want to so much that I don't have to do the discipline bits.
Right.
And that's not true.
No, it doesn't. And even in that, I mean, I think we've learned throughout the conversations we've had that not every goal that you're going to be working on is going to be an intrinsic goal. There are extrinsic goals that we know we're going to work into our lives. But there is this work of integration. It's a word called integration. Where we can take something that wasn't our original intrinsic idea or goal and work it in as much as possible to become integrated to something that we feel intrinsically attached to. And when we can do that, then we're maybe showing up. We're taking something we didn't want to do, but we're tying it to something bigger that we do want. And as a result, we're actually now intrinsically motivated or more intrinsically motivated to it, where it's not seen as much.
It's literally the hard but worth it idea.
Exactly.
The external thing that was given to me that I have to do that I don't really want to do, that's the hard bits. But if we're left with just that, it's not enough.
Yeah. So
then you have to punish or reward me to get it done. But if I can link that to something that is worth it, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'm in.
And so, but as CEOs or business owners that might be listening in to this, you know, we have these moments where we sit in front of our teams and we're trying to create a genuine environment or culture of empowerment. I know that's a trigger word, but we really are trying to set people up to, within a greater vision, find an autonomous route to setting goals within their sales teams or their divisions. And yet we do sometimes run into barriers when you start to go, okay, well, now how is that going to be held accountable? Because at the end of the day, what I want to be able to have the conversation with you as a key leader that's driving important parts of my company forward, I want to have a conversation with you that's not subjective in 3 months.
Right.
And I don't want it to be personal.
Right.
So the more we can make it accountable up front by giving you a part of, hey, how do we take what we need you to do and how do you make it personal? What does that look like? And you shape that. The more we can get clear, then the more we have an accountability talk and it's not subjective or personal. It's like, hey, it's out here.
Right.
I'm not pushing it on you. You're not pushing it on me, but it's out here. We can look at it objectively. And you're right. Did we hit it? How do we?
First of all, to do that work well, you got to have 3 things in place. This is where we lean on DC's work really hard. He suggests that there's 3 things that create the environment in which intrinsic motivation emerges. One of them is connection. Relatedness is his word. If people don't feel connected, if the space isn't psychologically safe, if you don't have that give and take and rapport and got each other's back teamwork feeling, then this probably isn't doable. People get nervous and scared and protective. right? Second one is competency, and the pursuit of mastery. If people are not competent at doing the work, how in the world are they going to articulate these big, powerful, risk-taking goals?
Yeah.
Right? If they're not desiring to get better at doing the work, why would they stretch into it? Right? So that's necessary. And then the third is limit or autonomy. And people need to feel the power, the ability to make choices for themselves that matter. Mm-hmm. But when you're doing that in interdependentness on a team, that has a lot to do with limit setting, of being able to say, here's the space. This box is the space in which you're autonomous, but you are not autonomous outside that space. That's Tony's space, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of us think of autonomy first, and it's a proper definition of what is really independent autonomy, doing whatever the hell I want.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a thing in the world, but that's not what it is to be on a team.
Well, and that's part of what I think we might face sometimes as CEOs, to some strong leaders who have a lot of potential. That's why they're on your team. They're not just, yes men or women, but they're builders.
Yep.
And so sometimes, though, what you get in that is this pushback of, no, I'm going to be independent. I don't want you telling me what to do. I want to be my own boss.
Right.
I want to set my own goals without you.
Right.
And whether I make them accountable or not, that's not your to tell me. I want to do that.
Right.
And yet we know that breaks down at some point, even the being my own boss, because at some point you have to still show up.
You're not on a team.
And
if that's if that's what you're doing.
Right. And you also have to just demonstrate results. Like, it's not about what you say, but at some point the rubber has to hit the road from a goal to actually results.
Yeah. So that's the starting point, is to be able to have these accountability conversations. You have to have those three things in place, unless you're just going to hold people accountable externally. And then we're back to punishment reward systems. But if you're trying to build teamwork around intrinsic motivation, you can't just let everybody do whatever they want. You can't empower endlessly. You set limits. You make sure you have the right people in the right position. You make sure that there's a proper and helpful set of relationships that are facilitate this kind of environment. When you have that going, what you're hoping for is this welling up from deep sense of purpose and mission through challenging conversations that require vulnerability, that create this harmony that isn't artificial. It's a willingness to not only engage but resolve conflict so that we can get to commitment, so that we can have high standards. But when you've done that as a group, and that's hard to do, this is not easy work, but when you've done that as a group, now what you're doing is allowing the group to hold themselves accountable. You're accountable to something bigger than any one person or department, often called a goal. I experienced this in grad school. When I was doing my master's work, we were in a hybrid program. And so we're spread out all over the country, and then we'd get together for a week or two at a time and be in person together. We had this ebb and flow to that. And because of that, the professor couldn't own the room. They couldn't stand in the front and just lecture all day. And so all this work was highly collaborative. And if I didn't show up and you didn't show up, I couldn't learn. Everybody had to show up. And so the group was highly committed to their own learning. We're very self-directed. And so when we'd come into this space to learn together, the professor would have created the space for us, but we had to do the work of learning together. And so if you showed up late, it was not uncommon to go, guys, I'm really sorry I was late today. Because there was this built-in accountability, because everybody was deeply committed to high standards. If you were contributing poorly, if you didn't do your homework and you didn't give, because I'd have to write something that you would have to respond to, and you can't do your work unless I do. And it created this environment where there was built-in accountability, and it shifted that word for me. It was no longer a professor holding me accountable, although they did grade our work in the end.
Right.
That's
or
fine.
Or a rule that you had to follow.
Right. It was
a natural.
We held each other accountable because we're holding ourselves. It just changed the nature of that word. And it really was a ton of work, but we all wanted to be there.
Yeah. Well, and too, when you jump into teams, the team dynamic allows you to achieve more than you ever could alone, but it also requires you that you can't hide in a team.
Right.
So there's a natural dynamic of accountability just by the team itself.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
Michael Jordan has I don't know if this is new or not. I saw it for the first time recently. And the question, he's there on the camera, and the question is, everybody's asking who's the greatest of all time. Who's the greatest player of all time? And he's like, it's the wrong question. It's what's the greatest team of all time?
Nice. I
Right?
love that.
And then he goes through all his rings on his fingers,
Yeah.
7 of them or something. He walks through all their wins and he goes, beat that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a great point that this thing we're doing in business and in most of our life is actually a team sport. You cannot win without the team.
Right.
And so so when that accountability structure shows up, it has to be in this new way. But here's the problem, I think. I think the hope, and I really think this is why goal setting gets hard, is we hope that we can avoid the accountability bits. And when we can't, we then don't want to set goals. Because every time you set a goal, you also set a problem or a gap or a not enough. If you say, I want to get there, what you're also saying is, I'm not there. And I'm probably not good enough yet to be there. So now I've acknowledged the work I'm going to have to do. And I think there's a way in which we hope we'll just not do that.
Right.
And then if we get there, it'll be great. The problem is the probability of getting somewhere you're not intending to go is lower than if you actually intend to go there.
Well, and within that too, you're sizing up a goal within that work because you're having to consider something we've talked about too many times, which is your activatable resources.
Right.
And so the facts are is like we can sit here and want a thing that really is intrinsically motivated, but then the next layer of real work for accountability's sake is, well, how much do I have to put toward that? You know, and we know our activatable resources, they're our time, right? They're going to be our money because those are limited and we have so much of that. But it's also this word energy or attention. And we know that we only have so much supply of that. And so we may have this big goal that as we've defined it, it's unrealistic because our activatable resources can't, get us there. So then there's this work, which is probably why another reason why some of our New Year's resolutions fail is we set high and lofty goals rather than just break it down into a simple, what can I do next?
Yeah.
I've got 1 hour a week or I've got 5 hours a week. Okay, let me set that goal into my fitness plan, my New Year's resolution for getting in shape or whatever, rather than trying to get a body, in 90 days that took me 40 years to build. I want to undo it.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. And we also, a lot of times the lofty goal is attached to an idea of what I will feel like when I get there, or that will be worth it. And it's like in the fitness thing, it's like going from being 50 pounds overweight to having a 6-pack.
Right.
It's too big a jump.
Yeah.
And you don't really understand when you're 50 pounds overweight how much work it takes to have a 6-pack. The commitment to not only exercise, but food and the restrictions and the discipline. I mean, it's incredible. And most of us don't need a 6-pack to accomplish in life what we're trying to accomplish.
That's right.
And so we set these goals that not only they're not realistic, it is not connected to what we want. It's a fantasy or a fairy tale that we're telling ourselves. And that's a real problem.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think what goals do, and this idea of accountability and holding yourself accountable, is you're taking responsibility. And that just remains a hard thing to do. You started out this episode by talking about the people who are the most, we'll say, effective or living purposefully, or they adopt goal setting. It's pretty common. It's the pros that are setting goals. The amateurs don't. And if you go back to a sports metaphor, the guys that are playing pickup basketball down at the park on Saturday, having a great time, it's fun. I'm not diminishing that activity, but they're amateurs. And they don't have goals. They're just hanging out. But they don't have coaches. They don't have workout. Maybe they're going to the gym, right? But it's a very different kind of way to play basketball. But the further you go in your basketball journey towards professional, the more disciplined you're going to get, the more goal setting you're going to do, the more coaches you're going to have, the more people speaking into your life, the more film you're going to watch. You're going to get critiqued over and over, and you're going to get tons of feedback.
Yeah.
Goal setting is an act of the pros. It's what pros do. Amateurs don't do it. And they get this, and it shows up in their results. The problem, though, or the difficulty is, the more of that you do, the more feedback you go after, the more pro you become, the more responsibility for your results you're taking. And that requires some strength of character, some resiliency to failure. It's hard. It really is. And I think we just hope that maybe that isn't necessary.
Right.
we often talk, people who go into entrepreneurship will often say, I'm tired of having a boss. I'm tired of being told what to do. I want to be the boss, right? I want to get rid of I want to be my own boss. And I'll often say to them, do you know what the problem with being your own boss is? And they're like, no, because it sounds glorious, right? It's like, you have to be your own boss.
Yeah.
There's still a boss in the equation.
Yeah.
You don't get away from that. But instead of having somebody else telling you what to do and holding you accountable, you have to do it for yourself. And if you're trying to be your own boss so that you don't have to take responsibility and you can do whatever the hell you want, your business isn't going to thrive.
Yeah, for sure.
When driven from intrinsic motivation, even when it's driven from who you are and what you're all about, and your voice still has these serious hurdles to overcome or things to recognize. It's not, in fact, I would say it's harder to set intrinsic motivation goals than have someone set them for you. Like, it's kind of convenient, right? Here's your goal, win or lose. We don't like it because we're being controlled. But that's why we talk about self-control and self-discipline in this body of work around intrinsic motivation. You have to learn how to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which it's harder. The cool part is, or the happy story is, it's where the worth it comes from. It's where you find meaning and purpose and depth and something that I think humans crave.
Yeah.
But when you walk out of the Icon office, there's a quote on the side of the wall, or a saying that we created. And it's a flip on a quote you'll see float through your social media space sometimes. And the original quote says, "If you work from your passion, you'll never work a day in your life." And I think that's ridiculous. So we reframed it, and it says, if you work from your passion, you might end up working the rest of your life.